lot of WR cows in here. Probably half of this herd is WR cattle.
Wow.
Right now.
And you've been doing this how long?
About 22, 3 years, something like that.
What got you into it?
Trying to, the actual truth was I needed a tax write-off on the land, the ag exemption, but I needed something that was low maintenance, and one thing led to another, and I just started getting the Longhorn cows because they were easy to take care of, and I had full-time jobs working, so buying these kind of cows, and probably 2 years after I bought my first cows, I learned about WR and I learned about Yates cattle and the difference between some of them. The CTLR is probably the most credible group for trying to preserve, give an accurate account of preservation of anybody. You just can't go anywhere and get these cows, and if we don't do something to preserve them, there won't be any. You know, I heard that 10 years ago, and it's probably more true now than it was then.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite in the herd?
No, no. They're all favorites, and I wish I could have had any half a dozen when I started 20 years ago. It'd have been, I'd have liked to have started with some of these then. That was bought off of the refuge. We bought her off of the refuge last year, and she was one of the last ones with the pedigree from the WR. WR 2498.
Basically, when we bought the property, he had his cattle there, and we leased it to him for another year, and then when
or traded it to him for
actually
that's how our herd started.
Yeah, so which was funny when we first bought the property. We lived across the street for years and just on 2 acres. And anyway, James's cattle was there, and Steve was like, when we bought it, said, "Hey, would you like some cattle?" I'm like, "Why would I want a cow?" By the end of the year, I was like, "Okay, I do." So we started with 7, and we have 39 now. So we think that's pretty good.
It grows on you.
Oh, they do.
Oh, now she walks around with them every day.
Yeah, but it was so funny that I remember that conversation. Would you want some? I'm like, why would I want a cow?
As you fall deeper and deeper in love with them, you start developing your own likes and tastes and backgrounds and all. So that makes it really neat too, to be able to take the information and yet still have your own type of things that you like.
Right. I like Japan as well.
He's beautiful.
Yeah, I sure like him, James.
Yeah.
How old is he?
Probably 6 or 7, something like that. Yeah, pretty.
Yeah, he's kind of got that Bravo look to him.
Yeah.
What are the traits that y'all look for when you're looking specifically like for a good mama cow?
Well,
And
since Gil's sitting real close to you
Yeah.
and you can hear him better, so you go out just like we did to look at cows, and you wanted to pick out some to buy or whatever, what would you be looking for when you buy a female to keep?
Well, I like to look at her tail set. I like to look at just a good clean underline, feminine head. I like a long head. I like a round ear. I like hair in their ears. I even like to see a trace of a mane on them, as well a little bit of hair on her poll. Thin horns, feminine horns. I don't like anything to look too blocky or too big around. And personally, I prefer more solid colored cattle, even though I even like the ones that are colored up. So there's just quite a few different things that I look for whenever I go into a herd of cattle.
Now, share why you look for things like the hair in the ears.
Well, that goes back to before everybody sprayed their cattle and they were out on their own. That would keep the bugs out of their ears. Flies and mites and all of that. I also like to look for a tight udder, not one that hangs down too much. Longhorn cow carries some of her milk inside her body as opposed to commercial cattle. And that goes back to the old days too, whenever they were living off the range and they wouldn't be dragging their udder through the cactus and the thorns and the rocks, would step on it when going up hills and down hills. And that's just another one of the good feminine mothering traits.
Visually, you've looked at the cow.
Yeah.
What it would mean to you if you could see the mother, grandmother, or daughters and granddaughters, what that would mean to you for choosing.
A lot. But, and another thing I look for is I don't like cattle with low flanks. It shows commercial type cattle that I just don't want, you know. And but like he said, I like the round ears, the hair in the ears, small horns. I like a good bag, but I don't want a big bag. Like you said, those cattle, they'd have never made it if they'd had big bags in South Texas in those thorns and stuff. I mean, they would have killed all of them. But and also the bulls is a lot the same way. You don't see a bull with great big long testicles like you do on a commercial breed of cattle, like your beef masters and all that. Everything's tighter on them, but it had to be.
What about the historical significance of the animal? What does it mean to you?
When you get away from that, you're getting away from the longevity and calving ease and all that.
Fertility?
Yeah. Like I was telling them a while ago, I sold a girl a cow, and she ended up 32 years old before she quit having her last calf. She was 32 years old, and you don't see Angus, Hereford, or anything do that. You know, when you get a 8 or 9 year old Angus or a Hereford cow, you got an old cow. Or a Longhorn just getting started.
After the Civil War, there were millions of feral cattle running South Texas. And it became a huge economic thing for Texas, whereas all of the other southern states, they were broke. They were bankrupt. Well, Texas had a unique resource that none of the other states had, and that was these millions of cattle running wild that the soldiers coming back from the Civil War, they could go gather them and drive them via the historic cattle drives to the northern markets. And all of a sudden, that gave Texas an edge economically over the other southern states. And subsequently, that's kind of put where Texas is today. And we're still an economic leader. Not just cattle, but oil, technology.
Why did y'all choose to join CTLR?
I learned about the WR and I learned about guys like Fayette Yates and just what their contribution, Fayette, his particularly, and then the WR as a whole, and what role it had played. And at that time, just a little over 20 years ago, when I got in the mid 80s, the WR was kind of the go-to place to get cattle for everybody. There weren't a lot of other cattle around, and everybody kind of wanted, they would have big sales at the WR, and cattle would bring, it wasn't uncommon to bring $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. That's where everybody went to buy cattle. And from a preservation standpoint, the CTLR is made a highly credible effort to maintain the purity.
With me, I really didn't have any choice. Being a relative of Fayette Yates, I was probably 6, 7 years old before I knew there was any other breed of cattle other than the Longhorn. So that's just kind of what I was raised with and what I was schooled on, and that's just what I chose to try to preserve and keep around as long as I can.
One of the things is that we have an open registration. Now, that doesn't mean anybody can get in and any cows can get in because it's far from the fact. But if you have the cattle that meet the requirements, they don't have to already be registered. You can, uh, if they meet the DNA testing and the visual inspection and all that, and they have a good history to them, you can register them. And the other organizations, everything had to already have been registered. There wasn't, you could see a real nice cow someplace, but you couldn't bring it in. And so it got me talking to Debbie Davis and Frank Sharp. And then they started explaining what this organization was all about and what kind of cows we had and why we had them and what they meant. And that kind of hooked me. But they're enjoyable. They all have different personalities. You can tell the difference. My wife and I joke about when we're going down the road and we see a herd of Angus and go, oh, look, there's a black one. And they're all black, but ours, they all look different. They all have different patterns. They have different personalities. It's a lot of fun.
What about the historical significance of the Texas Longhorn?
Well, obviously, that's when I started finding out from Debbie and Frank and some others as I talked to them. I realized that there's a lot more historical significance to our cattle than there are to others. And it obviously means a lot. And if you want to save what we had back during the great cattle drives, then these are the cows that you want to do. And as I've learned and see how the cows operate and how they act in different terrains and stuff, I can see why they look like what they look like and why what we're maintaining means something. An example, when I was first watching them, we were visiting a ranch out in West Texas, and they had a lot of yucca plants. And I was walking around while they were talking about the cows, and I noticed that all the centers of the yucca plants were gone. And then it dawned on me that, and I saw one do it, the cow can reach down, and because she's got such a long head, she can grab the center out of that yucca plant without the tip sticking in her eyes like it would other cattle. And so they have evolved to make it on this land without any special treatment where other cattle couldn't survive. And there's probably a huge advantage to that in the future, in that, first off, your F1 genetics, which is the first before when you're crossing breeds, the first cross is usually your healthiest one. And if you do away with what you're originally starting with, you lose that forever. And there won't be any more Longhorns if we don't try to save them to strengthen the genetics of the rest of the cattle that are around. And then they're used to foraging on low quality pastures and stuff. So you can keep these cattle in a sustainable fashion without having to change the grasslands, change the feed, having problems with them wiping out areas and all that. They just naturally survive on their own. And I think that's a good thing for our industry, and having cows that can be sustainable over the long term.
Not to mention they're beautiful.
Oh yeah, well that's what I say. They're all different. They all look different. You can spot them. I can tell which ones are which from halfway across the pasture. They're really smart too. I've seen a couple of occasions where we had some coyotes that came up and were threatening the herd. And they weren't really threatening the herd. I found out later what was going on, but the cows thought that they were being threatened. So they encircled the calves. The calves were all in the middle. The cows made it like a wagon train circle around them. And then they took turns charging the coyotes until they ran off. And so after all that whole episode was over, I went over there, and it turned out there was about a 7 or 8 foot rat snake that was dead. The coyotes weren't after the calves, they were after the rat snake. But since that was where the cows were, they didn't understand that, so they put on their whole show and drove the coyotes off from getting to that snake. Now, who killed the snake in the first place? I don't know. I don't know what got it. I don't know where the cows got it or the coyotes got it, but it was really interesting to see the natural instincts kick in and them protect their cows, their calves.
No, there's so much you could say. A quick comment about the historical significance. We can talk about it, but the point is they were significant in history. And I think it's kind of a two-pronged answer because, you know, why would you want to preserve them any other way than what they were when they were historically important? And that then gets to why did we join the CTLR? Well, the CTLR is the group that's trying to do that, to preserve the cattle like they were when they were historically significant. And improving and changing the cattle is the exact opposite of preservation.
And see, when you start going for strictly horns, you're going away from the longevity, the calving ease, and all that. You know, I mean, it's not about altogether about horns, which they're Texas Longhorns. But some of those Longhorn cattle back years ago might not have had over a 14-inch set, you know. And so, I mean, it's not all about horns. It's about the way the cattle look, the way they're built, the longevity, and the calving ease, and all the stuff that, you know, that, and the lean meat. It's not all fat, it's all lean. And it's just a lot of things to look at.
I've had years that I've had a 100% calf crop. Every cow calved and raised her calf. Okay, and that just shows the fertility, the longevity, the survivability of this breed. Yeah. And that really makes a big difference, you know, whenever you're trying to make your land payment and keep the ranch going, and every calf counts. Yeah.
Helen Overton, and I'm married to Sammy Overton. And Sammy fell in love with Longhorn cattle when he was 12 years old. And we married when he was 20. And so I inherited the Longhorn love. And I don't have any particular preference. They're just, as long as they're old-timey and authentic cattle. We love the preservation aspect of the Longhorn and the history of it. I've grown up for 57 years with Longhorns and love every moment of it.
My husband's dissertation on Texas Longhorns.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess he went to school for 18 years. Seems like forever.
Forever.
And got it, and but he did it and got his degree, his doctorate is in humanities.
That's a real good looking.
So, which is really weird that they let him
Right
on Longhorns, but it was a symbolism, you know, of Texas Longhorns. So ever since my kids were like this big,
That's a good looking bull.
anything that even looked like a Longhorn, he would make a U-turn in the car and go back and take pictures of. We have thousands of pictures of the symbolism of Texas Longhorns, and so it's about 600 pages, isn't that right? His dissertation. And by then I was kind of like this with Longhorns.
Yeah, right. I can imagine. I tell people when they come over, I don't think any of our cattle would hurt you. But if they're side by side, they like to bump each other, and you might be collateral damage. So pay attention to where, just pay attention, because they have long horns. And, again, I don't think they would ever intentionally hurt you. But if you're standing there, you're on your own.
Why is it important to preserve these cattle?
Original Longhorn genetics. One reason that we're all talking about here is for history. So if the Longhorns were worth something historically, why would you want to change that or improve that? You know, it makes much more sense to preserve in the truest sense of the word preserve, meaning keep them the same so that historically they will look like and be like, you know, what we know of them from history. That the old-timey Longhorns have are so genetically different, for example, from modern-day beef breeds, that if you breed a Longhorn with another commercial breed, the hybrid vigor will give you a better calf. And then if you can infuse in to the modern commercial breeds such traits as longevity, easy calving, mothering abilities, if you looked at all of that, yeah, how the Longhorns could actually be a huge addition and a huge boon to the modern day commercial cattle, just meaning, you know, for beef purposes.